So I want to say thank you to everybody for coming today. My name is Dave Zapponi. I'm the CEO of ECHO, otherwise known as the Executive Council of Homeowners or the Educational Council of Homeowners. Thank you for participating in this community conversation today. It's entitled Storm Damage, Maintenance, and Repair. ECHO is a 50-year-old statewide nonprofit association established to support HOA board members and engaged homeowners. Our mission is to foster a better quality of life in community associations through education, advocacy, and connections. For today's event, we have a few housekeeping items. These are now presented on your screen. In addition, slides were sent to registered attendees. Please take a moment to review the housekeeping items. Please use the chat icon to report technical issues and to communicate directly with other participants in the webinar. We use the Q&A feature to ask questions. We do not monitor the chat feature for questions. Today we have a large audience of HOA board members. We will do our best to answer questions, but we may run out of time. To help us select the most relevant questions, please use the thumbs up icon found in the Q&A feature. Simply click on the upvote icon to select your favorite questions. We do answer the questions with the most upvotes first. Please keep your questions general in nature and short. Questions about specific situations are better asked of attorneys serving your association or another appropriate industry professional familiar with your specific situation. We will respond in writing to some of the questions during the presentation. All questions will be answered during the Q&A session. Excuse me here just a second. Will be answered during the session. Right now we'd like to give you our disclaimer, and please take a look at it in the slides that we've sent to you. None of what is said during this seminar shall be construed as specific legal or expert advice from the speaker, sponsors, or ECHO. If you wish specific advice, we encourage you to contact your attorney or another suitable expert. The information we provide during this seminar is educational in nature and should not be relied upon for specific decision-making purposes. Thank you. Now I'm going to take a second here. Connor, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. I kept getting a disconnected sign on and I didn't know what that was for. So, okay. So this event, as well as our other events, are made possible by the generous contributions of our professional sponsors, Please join me in thanking them today. Our premier sponsor is the Kevin Boland Insurance Agency. Our Q&A sponsor is Silver Creek Association Management. And today's registration sponsor is Levy Erlinger and Company, LLP CPAs. And now a little from Kevin about the Kevin Boland Insurance Agency. Connie, you want to run the video?
Hi, everyone, and thank you for attending the community conversation today. I just wanted to share with everybody a couple of tips about their insurance. Oh, by the way, my name again is Kevin Boland, and I'm a farmer's agent for about 22 years. And today my team and I manage over 50 associations in mostly Northern California. So when is it covered under property coverage after a thunderstorm or a rainstorm or a windstorm causes water damage to the interior of your buildings? It's only covered if there's a sudden and accidental break in that envelope of the building. So a tree falls on it, the windstorm is so strong it blows up your shingles and water penetrates the building that way. That's when you're going to have a covered claim under your property insurance for your association. However, if the water gets into any structure, detached garage, a clubhouse, or the buildings, including the owner's homes, because of poor caulking or sealing, that's when you're not going to have any coverage. The only exception is to that rule is if the gutters were to back up and water were to pour into the building that way because of the reverse flow of a gutter. There is coverage under good property insurance if you have enough coverage by endorsement, which I always add to my associations, about $150,000 to $250,000 for backup of sewer and drains, then you're going to have coverage as well. I wish I had more time to talk about insurance, but not today. So thank you again, everybody, for taking your valuable time to be here today. And I look forward to learning myself. Okay, take care.
Thank you so much, Kevin. We appreciate his support and patronage over the years. Please support all of our professional members and especially our sponsors. They make our educational programming possible at little or no cost to you. Today's introductions are Bill Mann. He will be speaking today. Bill began his career in 1979 working in real estate development, then later banking, and eventually HOA reconstruction. Currently, Bill is president of the GB Group, a full-service construction company offering construction and consulting services throughout Northern California and Nevada. His vast experience and education have deemed Bill Mann as a recognized expert in community association construction, finance, and operations. Susan Hoffman will be joining him. Susan is the founder of the managing director of the management company Professional Association Services. Her firm manages community associations throughout California. Susan has participated in 200 matters involving alternative dispute resolutions, mediations, non-binding and binding arbitrations. She is recognized as an expert witness in judicial proceedings concerning community associations, including expertise in community management, community and board governance, HOA operations, association fiduciary duties, industry standards, and best practices, among many others. She has been an active member of ECHO for many years and has served as chair of the ECHO Management Resource Panel. I'll turn it over to Bill and Susan. Please take it away.
Thanks, David.
You bet.
Well, we're here to speak today on storm management, maintenance, and repairs. So we're going to go over a bunch of different topics. A lot of it's going to be preemptive on getting ready to be prepared to deal with this type of incident and not be reactive. We like to be proactive. At least I like to be proactive, and I know Susan's company likes to be proactive. So we're going to focus a little bit on that and then go into incidences if you do have a damage that you need to deal with. So the type of storms we're going to go into: wind, water, floods, waves, atmospheric river, which we're going to experience later today, I think. Snow has certainly been a big thing this year up in the Sierras as well, even in Southern California. Ice, hail, and freezes have been a big part of issues with a lot of communities this year as well with the cold weather. And then certainly not forget our fire season from the last few years that people have dealt with. So all issues, all types of storms that communities have to deal with, particularly in the greater Bay Area. We have all of them. We've had, this year we've had certainly floods. A lot of the coastal communities have had significant damage from waves and different things. And then certainly the mountain communities are dealing with snow right now.
And we're having hail this year. I've never seen as much hail.
It's not as bad as Colorado hail, but we're getting close.
No, fortunately it hasn't. I haven't heard that it's caused any damage yet, but there's always a possibility.
Yeah, thank goodness we don't have too many wood roofs left. So one of the things that I think that happens, particularly with self-managed communities, or certainly when we've gone through, a bunch of drought years, people kind of get off having their service agreements in place. And I think it's important to have service agreements on file for the different types of things you may need to use, whether you do or don't. Primarily, hopefully to mitigate damage if you do have some type of emergency. But Susan, what do you go through? I mean, with having proper agreements executed, how do you go through and certify their insurance and everything else?
Well, it's really important to understand what kind of services you need for your client. Usually the communities know who their service vendors are before we get to some kind of damage event. But we always ask for the certificates of insurance, and then we ask that they name the client as additional insured on their policies. That gives them direct access in case the vendor causes damage on the property. But you want to have your vendors lined up and ready to go and know who to call in an event.
Yeah, and
or-
have those insurance certificates already in your filing cabinet or in your computer somewhere.
Correct.
And not asking for them on Saturday when the tree hits the building. So I think we had the farmer's agent talk a little bit. I'm seeing, and I know, Susan, you may see this as well with some of your properties. We're seeing a lot of insurance claims denied due to improper maintenance. Where they're saying, well, you have no history of maintenance and this is a maintenance issue that caused the problem, so we're not going to cover it. Are you seeing that with any of your associations?
I haven't seen that with maintenance on buildings yet. I do have a claim right now that I'm arguing with an insurance company about, where a tree uprooted and came down on a building. And they're alleging that the tree had not been properly maintained, and they're trying to decline the coverage for the homeowner. We were able to have an arborist verify that the tree had been properly maintained within the last 2 years, but I was rather surprised. I've never had that happen before with an insurance company, although we know that they're in the business to keep the money they've made and they don't really want to give it back. So unfortunately, we're fighting that, but it looks like we're going to win that one.
Well, that's good. I'm seeing it on building claims as well, roofs and other things where they don't have any records of maintenance or inspections. One of the other things that has become a big issue recently, mostly due to the EPA and Cal OSHA, not regular OSHA, is any pre-1978 construction buildings need to be tested for lead and asbestos. Cal OSHA has a higher standard for the lead testing, which has to be chip samples. If you do have a pre-1978 building, I really recommend you get everything tested so that if you do have an emergency, vendors will be able to respond. The fines that are coming in on these recently are in the 6-figure range, and the larger the community, the more families that live there. If there's pregnant women on the property, the fines just escalate. So, and management is not excluded from this any longer. It's not just a vendor issue. So if you do have a pre-78 property, get your lead and asbestos testing done, have those reports. Once it's done, have those reports available, and particularly have them available if you have to call out some emergency personnel, so they have them on file.
And you have to be proactive with the vendors also, because sometimes they don't stop to ask, hey, there's a popcorn ceiling, could there be asbestos here? Well, actually, we know there is, and here are the reports. Some of them don't ask, they just start cutting into things. So you have to be ahead of that with them. Otherwise, they're at risk as well as all the rest of us, especially if they make it friable, airborne.
Yeah, so where we see the asbestos is, like, as Susan mentioned, the old popcorn ceilings are part of it. It's also in a lot of the drywall components as well on pre-78 buildings. And then asbestos is also in a lot of the pre-78 stucco exteriors. Lead paint, typically you're going to find anywhere that there's a painted surface. So that's why they need to be checked. Super important. Something that I recommend everybody that has a pre-1978 building get done right away. So one of the things, Susan, do you guys conduct annual reviews? I noticed that the insurance agent was talking about endorsements, and I'm usually looking for exclusions, but I guess endorsements are good too. So
well, unfortunately, they change them constantly now. Even mid premium cycle, they'll send you a change in coverage. So you do have to read them. It's unfortunately a lot of it's boilerplate, and you look at it and go, oh, not something else, but you do need to know what the policy is changing, so that you're not caught out or surprised after the fact. But yes, we make sure the boards get a complete copy of the policy on every renewal, and whether they read them or not, of course, is up to the board. But I go through them and look to compare them against the previous year's coverage. And I always ask the agent, if they don't give me that comparison, could I please have a side-by-side comparison of last year's coverage to this year's coverage? It's sort of a quick overview, so you can see if they've dropped something or changed significantly something. Sometimes it's not called out. You have to be reading the detail to understand what they've changed.
That's good. I didn't. So if you ask a broker for a side-by-side comparison, will most of them give that to you?
I don't have a broker that's not provided it when I've asked for it. Most of them give it to me up front, which is really easy. Sometimes they don't, and I have to go back and ask for it. But yes, every one of them's done it for me when I've asked.
That's very good. Now, have you had the opportunity? He was talking today about adding extra coverage for sewer line and drain line backups. Is that something that you've seen having to get added to policies? That was typically covered in the past. So
I've seen them adding it, but they haven't. It's not that we've asked for it; it's that they've automatically added and said, "Oh, by the way, shiny new just for you. We're going to give you $500,000 in sewer backup," or what have you. So I've seen them adding it. Sometimes they make a big deal about it and sometimes they don't. And actually, some of the coverages lately have been expanding things that they hadn't previously done. For instance, boiler and machinery coverage. They've added more levels of protection and insurance. And one of the insurance companies actually said, we want to see your elevator maintenance records before we'll let you renew the coverage on the boiler coverage, which of course we have. And that was easy. And they said, otherwise, some of the insurance companies are canceling those policies if you can't prove you're maintaining your equipment. So documentation and records are our friend.
very good, very good. Well, I can't recommend to everybody. I know even my homeowners policy every year seems like they change something on it. So it's not fun reading, but it is good to know what you're covered for. Are you seeing deductibles go up as well, or are they maintaining those?
The deductibles?
Yes.
I don't usually see them go up unless we've asked for them, because that's another way an association can manage its insurance cost. Is the higher deductible, theoretically the lower premium, although that delta is not so large anymore. But I do see more clients asking for $25,000 and $50,000 deductibles rather than the old $2,500, $5,000. And at the same time, I see them putting more money away to cover that gap.
Yeah, budgeting. So if those claims come up, okay, that's pretty high. So, all right, next slide, Connor. So types of emergency agreements, a little bit about this. So landscaping and trees. I think that, landscaping, particularly tree maintenance. Susan, do you have most of your associations on some kind of a tree program where they come out and audit all your trees and come up with a maintenance of those?
They don't necessarily audit all the trees, but we have it on a management calendar at least every other year for all the clients that they should have their trees reviewed and they should do their maintenance. Yeah,
I know a lot of the tree services. My association has tagged all the trees, and I can actually go onto their website and know when they're going to what year they're pruning it. So, which is kind of nice. But trees this year, because of the drought and some root issues, and then the high winds and the saturation of the soil, we've seen a lot of large trees that have failed. Some of them gone into buildings, hopefully not too many. I know we had an incident up in Santa Rosa where a family was actually, people were actually killed. So tree maintenance is super important. It's also, a pretty important aesthetic to the association. But I think one of the other things that people don't realize too is that trees do have kind of a useful life expectancy, and at some point it may be time to replace some of the large trees. Super expensive though, got to be budgeted for. I agree, and that they contribute to curb value. People love to see the trees, especially the big old trees, and if you lose one of those, it hurts the view, so to speak. Your curb appeal goes down. Yeah. So I think one of the other things we were talking about this before, Susan, is plumbing, sewer, storm drain cleaning, contracts. I mean, that used to be a fairly common thing, and I think a lot of people got away from it during the drought years. What are you seeing out there? I'm seeing a resurgence. Well, we kept up the hydro flushing on our mid-rise and our high-rise buildings. They do their hydro flushing at least once a year, sometimes every other year, depending on what kind of issues they have. But the storm drain cleaning, I really see people picking that up again. As I was telling you earlier, we have one community that had a lot of sediment in its storm drain basins. And they had a vacuum truck come in and just suck that debris out of there. And hopefully I'm waiting to hear that everything is flowing smoothly and there's no flooding today. I'll be good. Today will be the test. So. It will be the test. And I'm sure the vendor's hoping that I get that report too. Yeah. One of the things I forgot to put on here is sump pumps, because as a matter of fact, I had a very good friend of mine call and said, I have water kind of coming through my garage wall and didn't realize I had a sump pump behind the wall. He goes, I don't know if it's working. And I was
Oh
like,
dear.
so, and I guess all the uphill or downhill units in this association all had sump pumps. So they were all going through. Sump pump maintenance is very important. You want to make sure that's working before winter starts, because as they figured out, when you're in the middle of a rainy season and you need parts or have to replace a pump, they become very hard to get. So, and certainly supply chain issues with COVID hasn't helped that situation. So some pumps are super important to maintain and have them on some kind of a regular maintenance basis.
Well, and some buildings have sumps in their elevator pits. If they have an
That's a good
elevator
point too.
and they forget that they're there and they don't necessarily get serviced because sometimes those sumps are not maintained by the elevator company. You have to coordinate to bring in the plumber. And if that pit gets wet, you're really going to have problems.
One of the things, and it kind of goes to the one on the bottom of the list, that association in West Sacramento that was right along the river, and their entire ground drainage system on a very large property all went into a central ejector pump and then was pumped up to the city sewer. They had a backup generator there to support it, but somehow during transition from developer to HOA, nobody even knew there was a backup generator.
Uh-oh.
And the backup generator, they started having flooding during one storm when they had a power outage, and everybody finally figured out there was a backup generator that needed to be serviced. But that was one of those situations where they were servicing the injector pump and not servicing what the power supply was too. So I think culverts and creek maintenance are something that people get away from, particularly if you have a lot of drainage culverts on hillside locations. I see a lot of those with a lot of debris and stuff, and people don't spend time. Those, Susan, are those something usually you get your landscape contractor or something to maintain for you, since it's all pretty visible on the culverts?
When we have those, the culverts are the V ditches, and we make sure
Yeah.
it's in the contract with the landscaper that they have to go through there on some type of regular basis, usually twice a year, in the fall and in the spring, to make sure they're clear so that they can flow if they get water.
Yeah, that creek maintenance is not something typically HOAs had to deal with, but as land's gotten more scarce in the Bay Area, there are a lot more associations that have creeks running through them now. So we've seen a lot of issues with that. And that's another thing where, typically your landscaper isn't going to go down and clear brush and debris from the creek. So you may have to have a specialized vendor come in and deal with that. So,
well, normally if it's a creek maintained by flood control, they'll come and take care of it for you, but it's always good to know who's the responsible party for
that's a good point.
Whatever the body of water is. In Santa Clara County, it's usually Valley Flood, and they come in and do regular maintenance, and they're the ones you call if it starts to overflow.
It's good to know. Snow and ice removal services, certainly those are important to have if you have that thing. I think some of the people in the foothills this year probably got a little surprised by that because the snow level dropped so low. But those are things that you probably need to think about as we approach the different parts of the year. Defensible space clearing, that's certainly become a much bigger issue with the firestorms. There's companies that come out and do that. I know that my insurance company actually has a clause in there where they can come in and do it prior to firestorm coming through, which I thought was kind of unusual, but that got added to my policy this year. So are you seeing mower associations work on defensible space? I know you've got some associations in the fire zones and stuff. So
in Sonoma and Marin counties especially, they're very fire sensitive at this point, and so they are clearing all their buildings at least 5 feet. There's no planting within that 5-foot space. And then there's a state list, and I forget which organization put it out, but there's a state list of what you shouldn't plant in a fire zone because of combustible oils being put off by the plants and things. And so a lot of our communities up here in Sonoma County, they're getting very fire wise. And they're going through and removing anything that's on that list just because, and letter fuels, just because they want to reduce ever having to go through that experience again. It was just horrendous.
So the other thing I think that, particularly over the last few years, I don't think people were doing roof checks or tune-ups as frequently as they probably should have. I've certainly seen a lot more roof issues this winter than I've seen in a long time. And then when you get out to the property to look at your roof, you can tell that there hasn't been maintenance done in a long time. Those are where I'm seeing some of the insurance companies push back. Depending on the cause of the water intrusion, if it's a roof leak, because there was no maintenance, and the association has no records of maintenance being done. Gutter cleaning, that's one of my pet peeves of the world. I don't think you can clean your gutters enough. So I think the other thing too is the annual fire system certifications. Some municipalities are really good about making sure associations do this, but I'll tell you, I still go to a lot that I don't think their fire systems haven't been checked in years. So I don't know, Susan, if you manage all over the Bay Area, North Bay, South Bay, in all the urban environments, are you seeing, if you get into the more rural areas where they don't check those systems as regularly and the association needs to be more proactive?
No, the rural areas are more fire sensitive, so they're paying more attention. It's the centers of the cities that aren't following up as well because they have budget constraints, they don't have enough manpower or what have you. But if they catch you and you haven't certified your system, you open yourselves to major problems. We even saw one community next door to one of the ones we managed were put on community-wide fire watch because their system had been offline and they hadn't been aware of it.
Wow.
And so the city put them on fire watch. Very expensive if you have to go on fire watch.
I would think, the board would have some liability too if someone was injured or hurt if they knew the system was down and were addressing the problem. So,
well, I know I wouldn't sleep because
so.
that's a very scary situation. But can we jump back for gutter cleaning for a second, Bill? One of the things I wanted to mention is we just had a client's gutters cleaned, and they used water. They brought in their own water and cleaned the gutters because the association wasn't willing to provide the water. And so they were more conservative in the amount of water they used, but unfortunately they didn't verify that the downspouts were clear. They just cleared the gutters and they took the debris out of the gutters and cleaned up behind themselves, which was great, but they failed to make sure the downspouts weren't unclogged. And they've been back now twice more in the last week to clear those downspouts. So you need to make sure the vendor cleans the gutter and the downspout and takes all the debris off the property. Some of them use air, some of them use water, whichever one it is, you want to make sure they'll come back and clear it for you if they didn't do it right the first time.
Yeah, that's a good point. The scope of work on a gutter cleaning, because you're right, the downspouts a lot of time are overlooked. And then they don't clean up the debris. And I know that used to be a big complaint. They leaves all over my patio or my deck now, debris. The other thing I found, we had one project we're working on up in Davis, and the landscaper came and rebarked everything, and they plugged all the downspout drain lines. Couldn't perk out, so we had the gutters backing up all over throughout the entire community because of the bark. So, which was a new one on me. I hadn't seen that happen before.
Well, and taking that another step forward, you need to make sure that the downspouts drain away from the building as well. A lot of times the water's pooling and it's pooling against the foundation of the building, which over time, as you know, will cause problems for the building.
Yeah.
So you want to make sure that water is out and draining away into the landscape or onto the street.
Yep. All right. Connor, next slide. All right. So you brought that up, Susan. So here's my slide. So you guys have the perfect opportunity this weekend or tonight or tomorrow. Put your raincoat and boots on and go for a walk. And I got to tell you, it'll be one of the best ways you'll understand how your water management systems are working to see them in action. So like Susan says, ponding water at the foundation, you'll see gutters that aren't functioning correctly. Maybe they sloped the wrong way because the building's settled or there's something wrong with the gutter. You'll see water coming off areas you didn't know water ever traveled before. It's not a typical thing. And I know people don't like to do it, but you get your coat on and your umbrella and stuff and you go out. And then if you do see things that are wrong, I can't tell you enough, take photos of it. because it's hard to reduplicate it later or tell the vendor if you've got stuff that needs to be fixed. But I super recommend this. And I think, with the atmospheric river coming through, you're going to have an opportunity to really see how your whole water management system actually works. Okay, I think one of the things, and Susan, you can probably chime in on this, and a lot of this, to be honest with you, came up a lot during the firestorm. We had, communities that burnt down or evacuated. We had management company's office burned down. And, you get into this situation. I can remember back in the day, I was working with association in Fremont, and the Loma Prieta earthquake hit, and we had a meeting scheduled that night. And it was really nice because everybody just came to the clubhouse because we were having a meeting that night. But, back then, all the cell services stopped working, normal lines of communication. So I think it's good. And I don't know how you feel about this, Susan, of having some type of plan B communication kind of set in stone, so that if things happen, something terrible happens, and we lose our normal communication lines, that people can gather back together.
Right. We have a software that we use that can text in an emergency. It can actually call people's cell phones with a pre-recorded message. It'll email. What we do is what we call an e-blast, so we can send it to anybody we have on email. And if an association doesn't want to buy a package that does that, there are smaller packages focused just on communications. So a smaller community could still rent space or buy that piece of software and have that availability with their residents. Another thing to do with that, along with the idea of having a place to meet, is just have an emergency evacuation plan. And
there you go.
when is that going to kick in, and what does that look like? A lot of times we have fire alarms that ring in buildings, and a lot of the residents don't go out. And so we suggest starting to do those fire drills again, like we used to do in school. Okay, the alarms ring, where do we go? We go out away from the building. And people have to be reminded. We get complacent. Oh, the alarm's ringing again. Well, maybe this time it's really a fire. Maybe we should leave.
That's probably a good point. Because you're right. We work in a lot of buildings, and we're there during their quote, practice run, and it's amazing how many people don't come out of the building. So people do get kind of complacent. I think one of the things that we learned in the firestorm was, we had a couple of situations where as communities, were majorly impacted by the fire. The management company offices were destroyed by fire, and it's, hard to recapture everybody and get everybody, kind of back together and figure out where they're going to meet and what they're going to do. So I think having the plan in place and probably disseminated at least annually is good for everybody to have.
Agreed.
So a couple little different scenarios here. So we have, storm damage. What do we do first? I think the one thing that everybody can say is make sure everybody's safe, whatever the case may be, whether it's flood, fire, tree hit a building, car hit a building, whatever it may be, is make sure that, everybody's life is safe. And then determine if you really need to call 911, depending on what the emergency is. That may be the fastest source and best source to get help. And then if you have a management company, you might want to call your management company, depending on what the problem is. And then if needed, maybe your ER service company, and ER stands for emergency response. So if you don't have a company in your, handy in your phone, with the number saved, if you're a self-managed association, I encourage you to find a company that you can contract with that can respond to like non-911 emergencies. So if you need help, particularly these things always, Susan, how often do they ever happen during normal business hours?
Usually the really critical ones happen on the Friday night after 9 o'clock of a long weekend.
Yeah, I was gonna
So,
say it's
Not usually during business hours. They're not very nice that way.
no, I know. So I think we all wear our phones and everything's, and and so we're all dealing with these calls after hours, but they're super important and stuff does happen. And sometimes you guys need help dealing with things. I think it's also good to understand and have a service agreement in place so you know how much they're going to charge you. So that when you get the bill, you're not shocked or surprised, and understand how that all works. Because my experience is that emergency service bills are probably the most scrutinized by that board after the fact. So I don't know if you have the same experience, Susan. So.
Well, and if you don't have a contract, if you intend to call a specific company and they're not a regular vendor, but that's who you would call if you have the emergency, get their rate sheet. Tell them you want to use them in an emergency and you want their rate sheet. And usually they'll set you up so you can get it anytime their rates change, because as Bill says, that is an expensive call. And so you want to know in advance what their after hours rates are going to be. And they do have different rates for after hours.
Yeah. And I always recommend, if you think you've got an insurance claim, to call the insurance company and get the claim filed, whether or not you end up going through it or not. All right, so we have a large tree down in the common area. What do we do? Well, one, you want to make sure the area is safe and there's no down power lines. A lot of you probably live in communities where they're not above ground power lines. They're probably all below ground. But I've even seen this year with the trees, large tree roots that have come up, that they've actually uprooted some of the utilities as they've gone down, because they've wrapped either around water lines, sewer lines, electrical conduits, or gas lines. So I've seen some situations even with the underground utilities where some of the large trees have caused a problem. And I think at that point, you really need to get a hold of your utility company first and make sure that they can take care of whatever the issue is with any type of utility interruption. And then I think, you can have your ER company come out and cordon off the area. If you're a high traffic association, that you might want to get that done sooner than later. A tree service, if there's a big storm that comes in, hopefully you have a very good relationship with your tree company and they'll come and service you right away, because that list can get long pretty quick. So usually they'll at least come out and get it out of any kind of road areas or things like that. And then if the tree hits a structure, you really need to make sure that everyone's safe first. Call 911, have the fire department come out. And then there's ways of getting the trees and stuff. And then ideally getting the unit temped. Susan, have you had the lovely experience of having a tree go into a unit yet?
Oh, yes. Earlier this year, unfortunately, and it was, of course, 3 o'clock in the morning, and scared the daylights out of the owner. Fortunately, she was not hurt, but the structure is very damaged. And the insurance company did something I've never seen them do before. They wanted an engineer's report on the structure.
No, that's good.
I've never seen them do that before. And the engineer said it's salvageable, but there are a lot of repairs that have to be done. So it was an interesting experience. And that was actually, that's the same property where we had to prove the tree had been maintained within the last 2 years.
Oh, from this actual incident then?
Yes. Okay.
Yeah, I know that my insurance policy specifically calls out tree maintenance in the policy. So it's kind of an interesting. The trees have been a big topic of conversation this year with the storms. So.
And again, that's why records are your friend. You want to document that and know that you had your service done, so you can say, no, trees were maintained. That's not what the problem is here.
Yeah. Okay. Next slide. So we'd wind damage to the roof. What do we do next? So call your ER services or your roofer. Hopefully you have a relationship with a roofer. That's probably a better avenue to go than your ER services. Your ER services may be able to come out and temp the area, depending it. But if the storm's going on, you're probably going to have to wait till there's a break in the storm. That's, this year has been very difficult because the storms are just going back to back to back. So trying to get people up on roofs and things between storms has almost been impossible. So I don't know if you.
And sometimes you don't want the roofer on the 3-story tile roof in the middle of the storm.
No, you don't. And their
it's
workman's
just not a
comp
good idea.
insurance doesn't want them up there either.
Right.
So I think one of the things that I see happen with leaks in general, whether it's a roof leak or a plumbing leak or stuff like that, everybody's hesitant to call the dry out company to start working on the interior. And Susan, why do we want to call the dry out company right away?
Well, first of all, because water seeks its own level, so it's probably even gone places you don't know it's gone to. And secondly, because if you don't dry the structure out, you have mold that starts to grow within 8 hours of it getting wet, and it will do things. It will grow, and you want to get ahead of that. And the insurance company wants you to dry it out. The M word is not a good thing to have in your structure, and sometimes you don't have insurance coverage for that. So you want to get ahead of it. If the insurance company especially is going to pay for drying out, dry it out.
So I think that's the thing. It's the M word, and the M word is, as you said, a lot of times is not covered in the policy. So they need to get ahead of that. So I think, and then you call the insurance company, and file the claim. Figuring out who's going to be responsible for the dry out after the fact is a lot easier when things have been dried out versus suddenly having a huge mold claim or something, because everybody's, stood around pointing fingers at each other. And I know a lot of associations are reluctant to do that because of claims history and a lot of different things, and that they feel it's the unit owner's responsibility or something. But my experience is you're better off doing that before you end up in court. So
Bill, real quick, the M word would be moisture or mold?
Mold, biological growth.
Yes, biological growth. That's correct. You're correct. It's really not mold until the lab says it is. But the M word being a 4-letter word, Dave, is mold.
Okay, so it's BM then, right? Biological mold. Okay, got it.
Yeah, it's one of those things that and I don't know what must have been going on now, but 20 years, Susan, that we've been worried about that word. Seems like a while, but a lot of the stuff that buildings are built out, it's very easy for them to grow that to biological growth once they get wet. So between all the man-made products and the drywall and carpet, et cetera, flooring. So
correct. And you want to save your paperwork after you get dried out. So whoever that restoration company is, you need to make sure you get their completed paperwork, that they dried you out, get their pictures, get their moisture readings that they take. If they're indicating that you have more than 16% moisture, then you're not dry.
Yeah, the nice thing is they do come out with a lot of specialized tools to measure moisture. So as you said, Susan, sometimes you don't even know how large the problem is. Because they'll start measuring things, especially with these floating floors and some of the other newer finishes on the interiors. Is a lot harder to determine how far the water's gone. So.
And sometimes you want them to use not just a moisture meter, but you want them to use an infrared camera. Most of the large restoration companies now have the infrared camera, and that's the best double check on top of the moisture reading that you are dry. It'll show you in the wall, is it dry or is it wet? We have a steel frame building in San Jose, and the owner kept saying, it's still wet, it's still wet. I can feel the moisture in the wall. Well, it wasn't wet, it was dry. We were able to prove it was dry. It was just that it was so cold. The wall was so cold because of the steel frame.
Good point. Well, one of the things about roof leaks, and here's my experience with them, is the person that calls with the roof leak that's hysterical. Usually it's a roof leak that's not that bad. So I always ask, so if you're one of those people that has to take those phone calls, my question always is, I have water dripping from my ceiling. If I put a measuring cup under it, how fast will it fill up? And usually the person jumping up and down will say, oh, well, I don't know if it ever fill up. So you can at least get an idea of how urgent the thing is. I remember I had this other gal that called one time and said, I've got water coming in my living room. And I said, well, how bad is it? She goes, well, it's pretty wet. And so I said, well, can we send somebody out tomorrow? And she goes, well, I have teacher parent conference tomorrow. I'm a school principal. And I said to her, oh, really? School principal? I said, well, exactly how bad? She goes, well, my sofa's floating in the living room. but she was going to let me wait till tomorrow, but we ended up going out that night. So sometimes the hystericalness of the caller isn't always an indication of how bad the leak is. One of the other things we usually do too, and I know Susan, you do that. Usually if there's water leaking through the ceiling, we ask somebody to poke a hole where it's coming out so that it really drains out the ceiling and put a bucket under it. I don't know if you
Absolutely.
guys still do that. So
that's one of the hard parts of the job sometimes is they are hysterical or they're dealing with whatever they're dealing with, or their mind's gone somewhere fantastic, and you have to say, I'm really sorry, the roofer cannot get on your roof right now. You need to get up and poke a hole in the ceiling, put down a bucket, put down towels. We'll get to you as quickly as we can.
Yeah, and I think that this is going to be one of those prime weekends where it's going to start tonight and it's supposed to go through who knows when, and it's going to be one of those ones where trying to get a roofer out so it's going to be able to get up on a roof, or even trying to throw any kind of temporary protection may be difficult, may not happen. So and then I think the other thing is, as we said before, is to get the water damage on the interior, get the interior restoration company started on that so they can bring in dehumidifiers and other dry out equipment to keep mitigating the claim from getting larger than it already is. Correct.
And the mitigation is really important, because if you don't, and the insurance company finds out you didn't do anything to mitigate the damage, stop it from occurring, they can start limiting your claim, and you don't want them to do that.
So Susan, I'm gonna let you take this one since you were just talking about the city creeks.
Well, so we have a couple of communities that we have creeks running through. So one of the first things I always do is I figure out who's responsible for the creek. Is there an agency, or is it the city? In a couple of cases, it's the city. In a couple of cases, it's Valley Flood Control in Santa Clara County. So we make sure we know what the emergency response number is. And then we contact them and we say, we'd like to be on your communication and whatever regular communication you do. So we know what's going on with this creek. Do you do regular maintenance? What do we do if it overflows its banks? Who do we call? And we've gone out and met with the officials on occasion just to find out what their plan is and how it's going to divert away from the homes. In one case, they had a secondary channel that they had a way to divert the water if it got too high, and it could go into the secondary channel away from the structures, which I really liked. But they also helped us one year and gave us sandbags, which concerned me. And that was when we were not in the drought before. And now that we're back out of the drought and we're getting so much water, we again got an offer for sandbags just in case.
Yeah, and some communities probably need to have sandbags on hand, depending on how their topography and everything works and how the water flows through their associations. Because sometimes, particularly some of the older communities weren't set up very well for drainage, and a lot of them have issues at garages and stuff where the water will just come right in under the door. So
well, and most of the counties and the cities provide free sandbags and sand. You have to fill your own bags usually, but they will give them to you free. So you can Google up whatever municipality you're in and just Google sandbags, and it'll tell you where the location is where you can go and get them.
And they do work quite well. And sometimes you just need them to help divert water away from structures. It's not anything super fancy. So one of the things about flood is that typically if you have flowing water, it's not going to be a covered claim unless you have flood insurance. I don't know, Susan, if you've seen any other examples where it's been covered, but I haven't. So
no, we work really hard to try and make sure the water doesn't flow toward the buildings in the first place. But no, the only times I've seen them honor flood claims are with flood insurance. So that's why it's important to be proactive and get the water away from the buildings.
So I think we, talked a little bit, Susan just talked a little bit about the different water agencies with creeks and stuff. And I think some of the things you need to also understand that can impact the repair process. So if you do have building damage, or even if you have damage to your common areas and stuff like that, a lot of times there's a lot of regulatory stuff you're going to have to go through, whether it's the city and county building and fire departments on what they're going to require. Particularly if you're an older community, you may see some things that they want changed or they're going to require that you weren't planning on. One of the things I talked to the reserve study guys about is that, as the community keeps getting older, I said, I think that contingency number needs to get increased because because there's so many oddball things that come up these days with the building departments and the fire departments with building upgrades that I think that needs to happen. I think you also need to understand, particularly if they have creeks and stuff. You have like the Bay Coalition, if you're on the Bay, there's all kinds of water wildlife authorities. If you have creeks running it through, I know one association up in Sonoma has to deal with them because salmon runs in their creek. So they're only allowed to do work on it certain times a year. There's different types of habitats throughout the Bay Area. Some of them are for butterflies and some of them are for frogs. So, and I think you need to know that. And I think one of the things that came up with a lot of the communities, particularly some of the ones we've worked with down in Aptos, was the Coastal Commission. So they can put, a big stop and increase your put back time or reconstruction time greatly. So I think sometimes it's good to have a head start on some of that stuff and understand who you're going to be working with should some issues come up, because owners could be displaced for an extended period of time. So.
Well, and circling back on the insurance, one of the things you want to make sure you have is code upgrade on your insurance policies, because the fire departments have a say in how things are rebuilt. If you achieve a certain percentage of damage, you want to make sure you have the insurance to cover those code upgrades. Are
you finding that the insurance companies will still sell you code upgrade insurance? I know they're not much in the single family home market anymore. So
it is, but they're limiting. They won't give you full replacement value, and they won't give you the value of the face value of the policy. They'll give you some smaller percentage. And one even came out recently. It was like 12% of the value of the policy, and I'm like, not sure that would do anything, but I guess every little bit helps.
Yeah. So yeah, the insurance market's getting tougher and tougher to manage our exposure. So okay. Well, that's kind of it. So I mean, if as you see, I think if you guys get your service contracts in order, are proactive in that thing, then if a disaster or something does happen, hopefully you guys will be ready for it. And hopefully it won't be too painful to get through it. And then work with all your different providers, insurance agent, and everybody else to make sure you guys are safe. And keep good records and be aware of your building and what could possibly happen. You have to think outside the box sometimes. I really agree with Bill when he says walk around the building, especially in weather like this, because you'll notice things that you don't normally notice driving around in or out of the building or on a sunny day.
Sounds good. I want to say thank you to Bill and to Susan for doing this today. We're going into our question and answer session. And so I'd like to thank Kevin Boland Insurance Agency and Silver Creek Association Management for their support of the Q&A session. And I'm going to ask each of the participants to look at the questions in the Q&A feature. If you have questions that you would like clarification or just a separate question, please go to and type that into the Q&A feature now. Also use the thumbs up icon at the bottom of the screen there in that feature, and let us know which questions you'd like answered first. And we'll start from the top of those in the Q&A feature and decide what we're going to do. I'm going to go ahead and sort that. You can sort it, Bill and Susan, at the top. And let's give them a couple seconds to get their programs up and running and do some voting here. Okay, most recent. They'll say most recent. You sort by clicking on the down caret and going to most upvotes. Okay, so RK asks, whose duty is it to ensure that trees from neighboring properties that hang over and are growing into exclusive use common area, yards, balconies, are maintained? The HOA board, or the HOA and board, or the exclusive use homeowner? And how can the neighbor be forced to maintain their trees, the large roots of which are now pushing up against the building foundation, and I assume potentially causing damage? Who would like to answer that one? That sounds like a good Susan question. That's what I'm thinking too.
if the tree's in the common area, the association is responsible, and that would be something that I would suggest on your building walk on a regular basis. You're looking to see, not only where the canopy is going, but if you realize the roots follow the canopy. So if the canopy's out and it's overhanging the building, chances are the roots are going under the building. That's the time you want to get an arborist out there and get it looked at.
Now, I think they said this was exclusive use common area, right?
Yeah, yep, they do.
So all the associations I've ever worked with have a requirement in their documents that say that the owner has to maintain that area, and the association should be documenting the situation and asking the homeowner to take action on the tree, remove it, prune it, whatever they need to do to it. You want to avoid building damage at all costs. It sounds like that would be a really good potential for building damage.
Yep.
I agree.
Sounds good. Yeah. So look at your governing documents. Okay. Here's a question from Anonymous. And Anonymous asks, what is the software package that you use to e-blast and make phone calls? I'm not sure. I think that's a Connor question, right?
Well, the one we use is Pilera, PILERA.com.
Oh, I see. Okay. Yeah.
But there is one that I talked to a client the other day, and they were looking into, and I think it's called Real Watch. And they thought it was going to be versatile. It was just for communication. It was for e-blasting and for texting. I don't know the exact name of the product because we have Pilera, and so ours is multifunctional, but they were looking for something to communicate with their residents, and it just texted and e-blasted. So there are packages out there that will just do whatever you'd like to do for communication.
Okay, sounds good. Teresa asks, outside siding water damage and rotted wood have been reported over a year ago and no repairs have been done. I'm assuming not repairing is escalating damage. What do I do? What do you think about that? Or basically, what do you do about that?
Well, I don't disagree. It could be accelerating damage. It may not be, but it's hard to say. But I mean, the association's responsible, I'm assuming responsible for the siding that's decayed, and they should be maintaining their community. It's part of the board's fiduciary responsibility.
And you need to mitigate your damage. Even if you're in construction defect litigation, you still have to mitigate.
Well, let's take that question just one step further, because if I'm going to put myself in their place. Okay, so you've told the board repeatedly. You've also put in your a request to have it repaired by the management company. Do you have any other recourse than that?
The homeowner always has recourse to cause compliance with the governing documents up to and including a lawsuit if necessary. It's an action to compel the action by the association, and they have lots of options and lots of recourse. Hopefully it wouldn't come to that. But it is the board's fiduciary duty to maintain the property and watch out for things like that. So if I, as the manager, became aware that the board had been advised of a situation and hadn't taken action on it, I'd go out and get bids and information on the situation, and I'd start documenting.
Yep. And let's talk a little bit about those options that a homeowner might have. ADR in particular. I saw in your resume that you did a lot of dispute resolution. Can you speak a little bit to that?
So I always encourage the homeowners to talk things out with the board first. So if a homeowner were to contact me and tell me the board wasn't taking action or they were disregarding it, I'd say, what kind of information do you have? Why didn't you ask for a meeting with the board? Come to the homeowners forum. Every board meeting is supposed to have an open session where the homeowners can talk to the board. Have you given them your presentation? Did they ever answer you? I'll start talking to them in the background to figure out what's going on to see if I can help expedite the situation. But at the end of the day, the homeowner really should be talking directly to the board. I can be the middle person only so far. And I, at the same time, would be saying, this is your responsibility. Yes, there appears to be damage. Here's some bids. It takes all sorts of things sometimes for a board to get things moving. And sometimes there are reasons why there's damage sitting there, but you need to overcome that and look at the long game and say, we got to mitigate this. We need to get it fixed. Whatever happened, maybe they're waiting for insurance or something. you can still fix it and get the insurance on the backside. You just document everything really well. So things you should try to move things if you can. Sometimes the insurance company is delayed and other things happen. So mitigate the damage and try to correct it as soon as you can and work out the details in the background.
Mhm. To Teresa, there are a lot of ways to encourage and then force meetings so that you can have these meetings of the various parties involved with the disputes. And so I don't want to diminish that. You do have rights as a homeowner, and as a board member, you have responsibilities to listen to these people, including those that are stipulated in the Davis-Sterling Act, including an IDR, internal dispute resolution, and an ADR, alternative dispute resolution. You need to do that before you go to court anyway. And so there are processes there. The best thing is to go to the meeting, as Susan says, and in the open forum, and let them know. Also follow the process. Make sure you're documenting all these conversations and take pictures of any damage that you might see. Those are all helpful little tips. If this does go to court, we hope it never goes to court, but at least do the right things in trying to make this very clear that something needs to be done. And you'll avoid a lot. I think most people are usually pretty proactive about this stuff. If they're not, sometimes they just need a little bit of a push. And often I've seen when I get calls that we'll often see that some work is being done. They may be getting bids, they may be waiting for the water to subside or whatever, and it does help to give them a little bit more time. So let's go to Vicki, and her question is, in cases where covered roof leaks cause damage to interior spaces, our insurance agency has told us that they will not pay for homeowner improvements, carpets, tiles, etc., that exceed the original product, even though the leak is a covered item. Do you have any comment on that?
Well, I mean, that's not an uncommon situation where they'll just do it to the original finishes on a lot of policies. And I don't know, I mean, typically the homeowner's HO6 policy will step in and cover any upgrades past what was standard finishes at time of original construction.
Mm-hmm. And I think this is pointing to an important point, and that is read your insurance documents, make sure you understand what they are, the coverage before the damage happens. And then you can always ask for greater coverage if you need it, but make sure that you do that, and that should help you. And you should be able to read all those documents.
Yeah, and I'm still amazed at how many situations we come involved in where the unit owners don't have their own HO6 policy to cover the the gaps in the blanket policy coverage, like upgrades or relocation and things like that. So.
And the boards can have their insurance agent come to a meeting once a year and go over the coverages with the homeowners. And they'll come, they get paid a commission whether they come to the meetings or not. And they usually love to come and talk to the homeowners. Yeah. And that's really an opportunity for the homeowners to better understand what the association insures as opposed to what they should be insuring.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. If usually the insurance agents are more than happy to come by and develop relationships with the community. So that's a good resource and a good suggestion. It's also what I'm hearing as a common theme today is don't wait until the damage happens to do something about it. Be prepared. It's the old Boy Scout, right? And
yep.
Be prepared, get your ducks in a row, and when it does happen, if you need a restoration company, make sure you know who they are, make sure you have a relationship with your insurance company, read the documents, and I think you'll find that preventive medicine is good advice. Tree maintenance, Glenn asks, reserve item or an operating account item?
Well, normally I'd say maintenance is a operating expense, replacement would be reserved, but some of the tree, programs get pretty expensive. So I've seen people put the tree maintenance into the reserves as well. I don't know about you, Susan.
I agree. It's a two-way argument. As this should be operating or this should be reserved. So when it gets above about $30,000, I see the client saying, we're going to put this in reserves, and they're starting to fund it into their reserves, even though, and they're usually pruning every 2 to 3 years. So that kind of fits the mode for reserves, but it could go either way. And it's really the board's decision where they want to fund it from, so long as they fund it and do it.
Yeah, we in my HOA had a problem of a beetle, a borer beetle going into our trees and pretty much wiped out all of the mature trees in our community. And
Wow.
they ended up putting it into the reserve because they knew it was going to take a while for the trees to die and all the issues to be overcome. And we're just now, so they put it into the reserve study, collected the money, and then they're out now cutting the trees down and replacing them. So it can be very expensive. Maintenance is usually a maintenance item is in the maintenance.
Yeah, no, it can be a huge number. So
yeah, it can be. Okay, so let's go to Vicky again at the top with 6 votes. Remember to upvote if you want your question up front. Our property wants to remove a lot of trees that they say are causing plumbing issues. These are healthy trees and give oxygen to the environment. What can a homeowner do? I'm sure we hear this a lot. I know my wife would be one of them. What do you do about that?
well, I don't, it's hard to, I'm not sure what kind of plumbing issues that it's causing. A lot of the old clay pipe that was used for sewer laterals, the tree roots can get in through the joints pretty easily. So if it's sewer line issues and stuff like that, my guess is that if you're not in a district that's going to require your laterals to be inspected, you're going to be there soon enough, and that'll probably get addressed. If it's ruining actually service lines, that's kind of another thing. But I am not a big fan of removing trees unless there's a really significant issue, because I think they add way too much value to the community, to the aesthetic, and yes, they give oxygen to the environment. But that's my opinion. So what can a homeowner do? I don't know. I think that's one of those things where obviously the board's got some power over doing that. Susan, what do you think? I mean, I would rally the troops, I guess, if I was on the other side of it. So
depending on what city it's in, they might find it's really expensive for them to remove a whole bunch of live trees.
That's true too.
For instance, in San Jose is making you replace trees on a 3-to-1 basis, and the permit is very expensive to remove a live tree, and you have to have a really good reason why. And sometimes because the plumbing is underneath it is not a good enough reason. We had a permit denied for that. They would not let us take the tree out. It was within 5 feet of the line, but it was not on the line. So they argued with us that we should be maintaining the tree and let it stay, and they would not let us remove it. So it just depends on where you are, what city it is. The board might rethink that once they realize they're talking about thousands and thousands of dollars just for a permit to remove trees.
Yeah, there are other techniques you can do too. There's pigs you can run through the laterals.
Yes.
Pigs are like a little plastic plug that you push through it. There's also chemical ways to clean out your laterals. So ways to do it. They usually are pretty expensive, and that's probably why they don't want to do it. I've talking to the tree pruning folks. They also have methods to do that, to put barriers in along the pipes or wherever the damage might might happen, and they will stop the tree roots from moving. They'll dig down like 20 feet and put a barrier in. That's also happened. The tree grows the opposite direction. The roots grow the opposite direction that way. There's a lot of things you can do depending upon your specific situation. We don't know enough about your specific situation to give you any specific advice, but there are some ways to deal with this. I think Susan's point is excellent, that communities don't like trees getting cut down, and a lot of the Bay Area counties are running into challenges when they have trees and they want to take a tree out. So be careful with that. They should be careful. It also brings up a really good point that I wanted to bring up for all of this, and that is the importance of communication between the homeowner boards and the homeowners. Is make sure you keep that line of communication open, because during the disasters, during damage, there are going to be options, and people are going to have to make decisions very quickly. There needs to be a certain level of trust in your leadership to make those decisions on a quick turnaround basis. All right. Oh, Lisa Esposito. Hi, Lisa. I haven't talked with you in a while. Bill, how do you understand exterior repairs? How do you address exterior repairs, paint like stucco on pre-1978 buildings?
Well, first we need to test to find out whether there's lead paint on the stucco and whether the stucco contains any asbestos. And depending on the level, let's say it's not all okay and we have asbestos in the stucco, then the appropriate abatement company will need to be hired to remove the stucco that needs to be removed and disposed of properly. There's all kinds of processes they have to go through with the debris. It has to be tagged. It has to go to a special refuge. It all gets tracked back to the property. So, just because we're taking it off doesn't mean that it's not, there's not some record attached back to the property. So it's pretty significant. Lead paint, depending on the level of lead paint, there may be different protocols that need to be done if there's lead paint on the stucco as well. Not an easy thing. And that's one of the reasons why we have chatted with the reserve study organization and stuff about pre-78 structures, because if you do have lead and asbestos, your construction costs are going to increase substantially. And you guys need to know that for your reserve items.
Sounds good. Thank you so much for that answer, Bill. The anonymous attendee out there asked a question about foundation drain and who's liable. That's really going to be a site-specific question that needs to be determined by looking at what's going on there. So can't really answer that one. It could be any of the ones that you mentioned there. You need to take a look at that one on a specific basis. So I'm gonna pass on that question. Sorry, I couldn't be more specific. Let's go to Richard Hake. Richard asks, we've had landscape changes that now direct water where it has never gone before. What kind of company provides engineering services to redesign the storm drain system? Who's handling that?
Well, I mean, there's a couple of different companies. A civil engineer can come out, depending how significant the issue is, and a good landscape architect could probably deal with it if it's not too significant. It just kind of depends on the magnitude of the issue. So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, my experience is that most landscape companies are usually pretty good if they're large enough and they have the expertise on staff. Otherwise, you got to go out and get an engineer if it's a big.
Yeah, and some of the big landscape companies have internal design teams, and then there's plenty of landscape architectural firms too that usually have experts on staff that deal with civil drainage issues. So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and in the last year, this has become a problem, and we've seen it in several communities in the HOA world. So it is a big question. So sorry we couldn't be more direct with you on Richard, but there are ways to do that, and you might start with your landscape company and then go beyond that to civil engineers or our landscape architects. Those are the right ones. And there are associations out there that specialize in that give certifications and what have you. Okay, RRK follow-up. The HOA is telling their homeowners to maintain the tree is not something that the homeowner can do. So you can't maintain your own trees because the tree roots are from the non-HOA neighbor adjacent to the HOA building. Is it the duty of the homeowner or the HOA to force the neighbor to maintain their trees that are adversely affecting common area and the homeowner's exclusive use of the common area?
If it sides up to their exclusive use, then they certainly have a right to approach the neighbor and ask them to prune their tree. If it's overhanging the property line, they give them notice. It's my understanding that after 30 days, if they choose not to prune the tree, the owner could prune the tree itself at the property line straight up. But if it's really roots they're concerned about, same thing. I mean, if the roots are encroaching across the property line onto the owner's side of the property, they have a right to take action, protect their property. Mm-hmm. So if it's exclusive use, I would say it's the homeowner, but the homeowner could also ask for the assistance of the association.
Yeah, I would think the association might want to get involved in that a little bit. So.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Especially if you're talking about exclusive use, because that usually indicates a condo, which means the association owns the structure. So probably the association should be involved.
Okay, those are good answers. Thank you so much for that. Let's see, anonymous attendee again. What entity expert could tell you specifically where a leak is, where it originates, built up roofing versus rooftop decks. So there,
I would say that, a decent roofing contractor should be able to determine if there's a roof leak issue and where it's originating from. Sometimes it's not super obvious. There's, some of the newer roofing systems are floating. They just kind of attach randomly. So water travels under them. So sometimes it gets more difficult on figuring out. But like Susan said, infrared cameras help a lot with that. So there's new tools and stuff to figure that out. And rooftop decks the same. I mean, there's certainly dozens of forensic architects and engineer waterproofing consultants out there that can help with this if it's a bigger problem where you need to really figure something out. So.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so Nielsen, who's in Palo Alto, he's asking a good question. I hear this a lot about do you use bark or not, and is there a fire hazard with respect to bark? I know a lot of folks were told to put bark down for preserving moisture in the ground during the drought, et cetera, and then all the houses burned down, and so they said don't put bark. And so what's the story on that?
I think he's right. I mean, it's the bark, could increase the fire hazard. And like you said, Dave, everybody put it down so you'd maintain moisture in the soil. So it's kind of one of those catch-22 items. So I don't know, Susan, do you think the bark, is that significant of an issue with fire?
CAL FIRE seems to think so. I think their requirement is at least 5 feet off the structure. It shouldn't contact the structure at all. And yeah, usually we put down bark. You and I do, Bill, as gardeners, we do it because it'll break down and go into the soil and feed the plants and things. But yeah, a lot of people just use it for decoration. I see a lot of places now, they're taking their bark up and putting down rock. I'm not a big fan of rock, but it certainly won't burn.
No.
Yeah, and there's some barks that there's some mulches that you can put down that are less flammable than others. And you just, I think it's a good question of a landscape person to ask.
It may end up seeing it coming on your insurance walkthroughs too, where the insurance carrier will start saying you can't bark up to the building. 5 feet away on a lot of buildings is, you're back into the lawns or the hardscape by then. So,
right.
So,
okay, Nielsen, let's go to Teresa. And Teresa, walkthroughs done by a manager and board do not substitute inspections required in CC&Rs, right?
I'm not sure what inspection requirements she's talking about.
I think you have to look at the CC&Rs and read what the requirement is for the, your governing documents will stipulate what an inspection is. It should at least.
They might be talking about the 3-year inspection by the reserve study company too. And I would agree that would need to be done by the reserve study professional. So.
And some documents do require architects to occasionally walk the property and make recommendations and things. So it just depends on what the documents say.
Yeah, about the year 2000, I think that developers are all required to put together maintenance manuals for their new communities, and I think some of the times as like you said, Susan, they'll write things in the governing documents about what level of person needs to do the inspection. So.
Right.
Mm-hmm. That's good. And of course, we have our SB 326 coming up as well for elevated elements. So that's I'll throw that out. That's got to be done pretty quickly too. So if you and that one does stipulate that you have to have someone who's an architect or an engineer to do that.
Structural engineer.
Yeah, right. Not a civil engineer.
Not a civil. Poor civil guys. So.
Anonymous attendee asks, if you have 60 buildings in a community, our roofer said roofs should be inspected every 5 years. You mentioned annual inspections. Every roofer tells you something different. How do you budget for this annually or every 5 years?
Well, I think, depending on the age of the community and the age of the roof, I think 5 years maybe on a newer roof might be okay. One of the things, and I don't know what type of roof they're talking about. If it's a steep slope, fairly simple composition shingle roof, that might be fine if they're not in a high wind area or something where shingles are getting blown off. But as roofs get older, I think more frequent inspections, and Susan, you may disagree, but I think more frequent inspections will save you a lot of headaches down the road.
I don't disagree at all. Annual, biannual, maybe every 3 years, but you should be doing them and put them on a schedule and make sure they get done.
One thing I'd like to add is we had a roofer, Westlake, gave a presentation about a month ago, and we talked about warranties. One of the things in your warranties for your roofing materials, you'll want to read that warranty, and they often have an inspection period that you have to document that you've done it. And so take a look at your warranties as well, because that's going to play into this whole thing. So they're all over the board, but frankly, you look at your warranty, it's going to stipulate when you have to have it in order to keep that warranty valid. All right, let's see, what professional does the annual roof checkup? Who does the roof checkups, the annual roof checkups?
Either a roofing consultant or a competent roofing company. So.
Okay, so we're getting right there to the end of the day. So make sure you, I'll give you a couple seconds here to do your upvotes, and I'll take the top 2 or so, and then we'll call it a day. Right now we have G. Williams. Who pays for the engineering report if the insurance company requires it?
The insurance company.
Good, quick answer.
That was my first question. They said, oh no, it's covered under your policy. That's why we're requiring it. Okay.
Perfect. That's good. All right. Good question, G. Anonymous attendee again asks, what if a new solar was installed, solar panels, I'm assuming, was installed on the association's building and was damaged from the recent storms? Is that covered by storm or considered an installer issue?
I'd say it's an installer issue. Usually, I'll be quiet and let Bill speak, but usually on the solar, I'm seeing that the solar companies installing panels are also providing a 10-year warranty for roof damage. So if the wind shear picked up and lifted a solar panel up off the roof and ripped the supports out and took the roof with it, I'd say that's the solar company all day long.
I would agree.
So we had a solar panel presentation about February, I think it was, and they talked extensively about this question. So I would recommend going to the ECHO website and looking for that. And if you can't find it on the ECHO website, drop Connor. I'm going to volunteer Connor an email, and he will get you the link to that. My understanding is that you need to have a solar policy. If you're a board member, the board should have a solar policy, and the compliance and clarity about who's responsible for what needs to be in that policy before you put anything on the top of the roof. Then remember that often the roofing material warranty is voided if it's penetrated. So you have the issue of putting panels on the roof and then that voiding all the other roofing that you have that's from the same company. So you got to be very careful. There's a lot of real particular things that you need to do when you start thinking about putting solar panels in. And don't even get me started on the charging stations, because they have their own list of things that you have to go with too. But when it comes to damage, that was one of the major issues that most boards are dealing with now when they have solar panels on the roofs, especially if those are common roofs. And the first place to start is with a real solid, legally defensible policy. And that's where you begin, and then go from there and read, make sure you're looking at your warranties, because a lot of the warranties will be voided. So anyhow, there you go. That's what I have for today. I want to say thank you to everyone that came today, and in particular to our speakers today, Bill and Susan, for doing a wonderful job. We appreciate that. So I want to thank all of ECHO members for coming today and supporting our ongoing ECHO webinars. For those of you joining us today who are not members, you are invited to become a member. You or your community can join by going to www.echo-ca.org and clicking on the membership tab. For our members, please invite your friends, boards, and especially management firms and vendors to join ECHO. A simple invitation is often all it takes to encourage a person to become a member of ECHO. Please help us to grow the association and continue this excellence in education for HOAs. This year, ECHO is celebrating its 50th anniversary. We have special activities planned throughout the year, including a grand 50th anniversary celebration scheduled for Cinco de Mayo, May 5th. We hope to see you there, and we're going to be sending out registration information very soon. So look for that. We hope all of you who are ECHO members will be there, and any other HOAs that want to try it out and just come and visit and be part of the celebration. If you have some time and would like to become more involved with ECHO, we have a few opportunities for you. Please refer to the slide. If you see anything that looks interesting, please send me an email at dzapponi@echo-ca.org. We're starting our resource panels, and we're looking for leadership team members and participants in a whole host of things. So please take a look at that. We also have some paid positions. We're looking for a new person, a part-time person, to help us with event coordination. So if you know somebody who would like to stay at home and work, this is a remote position. We're looking for someone to help us there. Got to be highly organized, self-startered, and being willing to work with me on a frequent basis. And that may be the hardest thing to do. Now, for our other announcement, the San Diego Resource Panel will meet in person on March 15th. That's next Wednesday or next week. I think it's Wednesday, from 11:30 to 1 p.m. at the Crest Hill Library. There is free parking below the library, and for homeowners, there is also, for homeowners, there's no cost to attend. We will be discussing insurance matters. So this is going to be one of the key reasons. The reason we're doing insurance is because the presenter, Bridget Tabor, she was telling us that they're getting all kinds of calls from homeowner boards about their insurance policies. She's a State Farm agent, and how to deal with the insurance. There have been a lot of denials as well. So she's going to be talking about those and how to manage your risk. It's a great program. If you know someone down there, please send them along. Also, we invite you to invite any HOA board member or former board member to join ECHO's Board Members Club. The club meets via Zoom every second Tuesday of the month from 5:30 to 7 p.m. The meeting next week will be a highly interactive discussion on board ethics, and I expect this will be a hot topic that generates some lively conversations in our smaller breakout rooms. We hope to see you there. The Board Members Club meeting is open only to ECHO members and those who serve or have served on an ECHO board. It is 1.5 hours long from 5:30 to 7, conducted online. Please contact Connor Zapponi at connor@echo-ca.org to learn more about the club. ECHO is also forming the ECHO Awards Committee to review nominations for the ECHO We're Here For You Awards. Nominations will be open through March 10th, tomorrow. We will be presenting the awards on May 5th at our 50th anniversary celebration. For more information, please contact Jacqueline Price at ECHO, and she will be happy to help you. The Board Members Club spent their last meeting discussing the vendors and management firms in the industry, and we kept it at a high note to make sure that we had some really qualified professional service providers and homeowners involved here. This is for homeowners, board members, our suppliers, and for the management firms and law firms. So please take a look, and if you want to participate or send in a nomination, go to our website and you'll find a nomination form there. Once again, thank you to our sponsors for making this workshop possible. Thank you to our faculty for designing and presenting the program, and of course to all of you for attending today and making this event a success. Each ECHO appreciates your investment in education to foster a better quality of life in HOA communities. Thank you so much for coming today.